On a spring afternoon in the Brittany port of Lorient during mid-May 1943, Captain Eberhard Gott sat in the cramped offices of the U-boat High Command reviewing intelligence photographs that had recently arrived from Berlin. The monocle perched in his eye socket reflected sunlight as he studied images depicting what American naval authorities were apparently calling an aircraft carrier. When he first glimpsed the USS Bogue in these reconnaissance shots, a vessel that had already spent 8 months on active duty but was only now drawing German attention, the senior officer permitted himself an audible chuckle at the absurdity of what he was seeing. This floating contraption looked so diminutive, so clearly jury-rigged from commercial shipping components, that genuine amusement replaced his usual professional severity. Passing the photograph across his desk to Rear Admiral Hans-Georg von Friedeberg, Gott watched his colleague examine the image with matching derision. That evening's operational log entry captured the prevailing sentiment when Gott recorded his assessment that the Americans were apparently so desperate they had resorted to constructing carriers from ordinary merchant vessels. These seagoing boxes equipped with a handful of aircraft could never pose a meaningful challenge to the Wolfpack operations, he concluded. The vessels lacked the velocity of proper fleet carriers, the protective armour of legitimate warships, and the refined engineering of authentic naval architecture. What Gott was witnessing, he wrote, was nothing more than desperation given physical form in welded steel. Neither Gott nor Friedeberg possessed any inkling that the crude vessel in those photographs represented the mechanism that would dismantle their entire maritime strategy. Before 18 additional months elapsed, these compact escort carriers would revolutionize the Atlantic campaign from a tactical situation favoring German forces into an Allied triumph so absolute that U-boat personnel would describe their operational assignments as barely distinguishable from suicide missions. The metamorphosis was already taking shape in American construction facilities where Henry Kaiser was manufacturing escort carriers at a tempo exceeding Germany's submarine production rate. The mental transformation from dismissive contempt to genuine terror would unfold across months rather than years as German naval commanders discovered that American manufacturing philosophy had once more surpassed anything their strategic thinking had anticipated. The actual narrative commenced in earnest during early June 1941, when the American president, functioning a full year and a half before the Pearl Harbor attack, perceived what his naval leadership initially rejected as impractical fantasy. The nation required aircraft carriers by the hundreds, yet traditional fleet carriers demanded 3 full years for construction and consumed resources equivalent to 10 destroyer vessels. The presidential solution appeared preposterous to conventional naval theorists on both Atlantic shores. Transform merchant shipping into carriers, manufacture them on commercial production lines using assembly techniques borrowed from civilian industries, and acknowledge that the resulting vessels would possess obvious limitations regarding speed, survivability, and capacity, but construct them in such overwhelming quantities that their individual shortcomings became strategically meaningless. Captain Friedrich Ruger, functioning as naval liaison officer attached to the German Supreme Command structure, examined the preliminary American escort carrier specifications during early 1942 with the incredulity of a trained professional. Maximum velocity barely exceeding 18 knots, hardly superior to a submarine operating on surface diesel engines. Flight decks constructed from timber on certain models. Commercial-grade steel plating rather than military armour. Single propeller shafts vulnerable to torpedo strikes. In his analytical report prepared for Admiral Raeder, Ruge observed that the Americans seemed to be confusing quantitative superiority with qualitative excellence. These vessels represented maritime catastrophes awaiting their inevitable occurrence. Any competently trained U-boat commander would find them exceptionally rewarding targets. The confidence pervading German naval circles rested upon substantial historical evidence. Their submarine fleet had sent 1,299 Allied vessels totaling more than 6 million tons to the ocean floor between September 1939 and December 1942. The coordinated attack tactics developed under Admiral Karl Dönitz had transformed the North Atlantic into what the British Prime Minister privately characterised as the singular aspect of the war that genuinely frightened him. U-boats functioned with near-complete freedom of action, surfacing during nighttime hours to pursue convoys using diesel propulsion that delivered 17-knot surface velocity. Aircraft represented the most severe threat to submarine operations, yet land-based aviation could not reach the mid-Atlantic expanse, that lethal geographical space beyond aircraft operational radius where U-boats congregated to massacre merchant shipping. Lieutenant Commander Herbert Werner, commanding U-230, documented in his operational diary on the 3rd of March 1943 his evaluation of American escort carriers following his initial encounter with one near convoy SC-121. Observed what appeared to be a merchant vessel equipped with aircraft on its upper deck, too sluggish to constitute a genuine threat, too compact to operate a significant air complement. Maintained surveillance for 2 full hours. Aircraft operations appeared amateurish, with observable difficulties managing wind conditions. Transmitted to headquarters that American desperation now apparently included deploying merchant ships equipped with aircraft into combat zones. Werner's dismissive assessment reflected standard German naval doctrine that completely failed to comprehend 3 fundamental factors. First, the escort carriers required no exceptional speed because they travelled alongside convoys moving at 8 to 10 knots. Second, they required no massive air groups because their aircraft needed only to compel U-boats to submerge, thereby reducing their velocity from 17 knots to 7 knots underwater, rendering them incapable of achieving favourable attack positions. Third, and most devastatingly, the Americans would manufacture such overwhelming numbers of these carriers that the entire Atlantic would fall within aircraft surveillance coverage. The manufacturing statistics that would ultimately doom the U-boat force were already accumulating by spring 1943, though German intelligence drastically underestimated them. Henry Kaiser's Vancouver-Washington construction facility had compressed the building timeline for a Casablanca-class escort carrier from 6 months down to 10 weeks. Through standardizing components and implementing assembly techniques absorbed from automobile manufacturing, Kaiser's workforce could launch a fresh escort carrier every 7 days by summer 1943. German estimates placed American escort carrier production at perhaps 1 per month. The reality approached 1 every 5 days during peak production periods. Lieutenant Commander Peter Creamer, commanding U-333, experienced the initial indication of what mass-produced naval aviation signified on the 23rd of April 1943. His vessel was running surfaced 650 miles southwest of Ireland, well within the mid-Atlantic gap that had historically functioned as a U-boat sanctuary. The lookout's warning cry sent the crew into frantic action. No land-based aircraft could possibly reach this position. Then he observed them, 2 Avenger torpedo bombers approaching from the northeast. His war diary captured the bewilderment. Aircraft at impossible distance from terrestrial bases. Must originate from fleet carrier, yet no fleet carrier reported in operational area. Emergency dive initiated. Depth charges detonated in close proximity. Sustained minor structural damage. Surfaced after 2 hours to discover convoy accompanied by converted merchant vessel launching aircraft. How many of these vessels do the Americans possess? The answer to Creamer's question would have shattered German morale entirely. By May 1943, the United States Navy had commissioned 11 escort carriers with 40 additional hulls under construction. Each carrier operated between 24 and 30 aircraft. The pilots were predominantly reservists, men who had occupied civilian professions 2 years earlier, trained in abbreviated programs that horrified traditional naval aviators. Yet these amateur pilots flying from merchant ship carriers were preparing to accomplish what the German Navy had declared impossible: the complete neutralization of the U-boat threat. Rear Admiral Julius Führer, reviewing German naval intelligence summaries in June 1943, noted the increasing frequency of U-boat encounters with carrier aircraft in previously secure areas. His analysis, discovered in captured documents following the war, revealed mounting anxiety. American escort carriers now reported in North Atlantic, South Atlantic, Mediterranean approaches. Intelligence suggests at minimum 20 operational vessels. If accurate, this represents a fundamental transformation in convoy protection capabilities. Recommend immediate reassessment of Wolfpack operational doctrine. The reassessment arrived too late. USS Bogue and her screening vessels had already initiated what U-boat crews would subsequently term the prolonged Black May period. On the 22nd of May 1943, Bogue's aircraft detected U-569 running surfaced. The submarine executed an emergency dive, but the Avenger marked its position with a smoke float. 4 hours of coordinated attacks ensued. U-569's commander, Captain Lieutenant Hans-Peter Hinsch, surfaced his mortally wounded vessel long enough to transmit a final message, under continuous air attack. Carrier aircraft maintaining contact despite evasion attempts. No escape possible. Scuttling vessel. Admiral Dönitz personally reviewed the transmission, initially suspecting British deception operations. Only after 2 additional boats reported similar experiences did reality begin penetrating German naval consciousness. Continuous air attack had been theoretically impossible in the mid-Atlantic, yet experienced commanders were reporting precisely that phenomenon. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Rudloff, commanding U-709, encountered USS Kors aircraft on the 24th of June 1943. His subsequent report revealed the tactical revolution unfolding. Attacked by carrier aircraft 700 miles from nearest terrestrial position, compelled to remain submerged for 14 hours, battery reserves exhausted, surfaced during nighttime hours to recharge, immediately detected by aircraft equipped with apparent detection equipment. Aircraft appear to possess unlimited persistence. Request instructions for managing continuous air coverage. No instructions existed because German naval doctrine had never contemplated continuous air coverage in mid-ocean expanses. Operating in hunter-killer configurations with 3 to 4 destroyers, each escort carrier could maintain dawn-to-dusk surveillance across a 100-mile radius. When multiple escort carriers functioned together, they created overlapping zones that rendered surface operations suicidal for U-boats. The technical capabilities of American escort carriers significantly exceeded German estimates. Each Casablanca-class carrier displaced 7,800 tons and measured 512 feet in length. The flight deck could accommodate 20,000-pound aircraft landing at 80 miles per hour. The hangar deck provided space for 28 aircraft with maintenance facilities. Ammunition magazines contained 500,000 rounds of machine gun ammunition plus depth charges, bombs and torpedoes sufficient for 2 weeks of continuous operations. Lieutenant Commander Adalbert Schnee, among Germany's most decorated U-boat commanders, confronted this reality on the 13th of July 1943, when U-201 was caught surfaced by aircraft from USS Kors. His post-action report conveyed the shock. Aircraft appeared without warning, insufficient time for proper crash dive, went deep immediately, heard multiple depth charges, remained at maximum depth for 6 hours, surfaced after darkness, immediately illuminated by aircraft with powerful searchlight. This pattern repeated 3 times. Aircraft seemed to know precisely where we would surface. What Schnee could not know was that Kors aircraft carried ASV Mark III radar, capable of detecting a surfaced submarine at 15 miles in complete darkness. The equipment, combined with searchlights for illumination and acoustic homing torpedoes, meant that darkness no longer protected U-boats. U-boat crews had always depended on nighttime surface operations to recharge batteries and achieve speed to reach attack positions. Now, every surface moment invited destruction from above. The production miracle enabling this transformation defied German comprehension. Kaiser Shipbuilding produced the 50th escort carrier, USS Casablanca, in November 1943, merely 18 months after laying the first keel. The ship was constructed in 101 days from keel laying to commissioning. Every component was standardized. Parts manufactured in 267 factories across 32 states arrived at the shipyard on precise schedules. Assembly proceeded 24 hours daily, 7 days weekly. German intelligence officer Commander Hans Meckel, analyzing American shipbuilding capacity in December 1943, wrote a report that Admiral Dönitz initially rejected as defeatist. American escort carrier production appears to exceed 1 unit weekly. At this rate, by mid-1944, they will possess over 100 such vessels. Each carrier negates the effectiveness of 3 to 5 U-boats. Projection indicates U-boat force will be neutralized within 12 months. By January 1944, American escort carriers were not merely defending convoys, but actively hunting U-boats. Hunter-killer groups centered on escort carriers prowled the Atlantic, using intelligence from decoded transmissions to locate U-boat patrol lines. The hunted had become hunters, and German submarines found themselves trapped in an increasingly lethal environment. U-boat ace Captain Lieutenant Werner Henke, commanding U-515, experienced this reversal on the 9th of April 1944. Operating north of the Azores, U-515 was located by aircraft from USS Guadalcanal. Henke, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, with 26 ships sunk, found himself helpless against coordinated air and surface attack. His final radio transmission conveyed unprecedented desperation. Under attack by multiple aircraft. Cannot remain surfaced. Cannot escape submerged. Batteries failing. Chlorine gas in boat. Destroyer approaching. Long live Germany. The escort carrier Guadalcanal and her hunter-killer group had revolutionized anti-submarine warfare. Operating independently of convoys, they could pursue U-boat contacts for days. On this patrol alone, Guadalcanal's group would sink 3 U-boats and damage 2 others. The carrier's aircraft flew 2,484 hours in 30 days. German submarines that had once stalked the Atlantic now cowered beneath the waves. The technical superiority of American production extended beyond mere numbers. Each escort carrier incorporated lessons learned from previous operations. The Casablanca-class ships built in late 1943 featured improved radar, better communication systems, stronger flight decks, and enhanced crew habitability. German observers who expected American mass production to mean inferior quality discovered the opposite. Captain Klaus Scholz, analyzing captured American technical documents in February 1944, reported to U-boat command. American escort carriers employ assembly techniques that should be theoretically impossible. Entire sections are prefabricated, down to installed equipment and wiring. These sections, weighing up to 200 tons, are lifted by cranes and welded together. A ship takes shape in weeks rather than months. Each vessel benefits from lessons learned on previous hulls. By March 1944, the psychological transformation of the U-boat force was complete. Crews that had once competed for tonnage sunk now celebrated mere survival. Morale collapsed as experienced crews recognized their situation. With over 50 escort carriers operational and more launching monthly, there was nowhere in the Atlantic beyond aircraft reach. The numbers confirmed the transformation. In May 1943, before escort carriers became fully operational, U-boats sank 50 Allied ships. By May 1944, with over 60 escort carriers active, U-boats sank only 5 ships while losing 25 submarines. The exchange ratio had reversed so completely that Dönitz considered suspending operations entirely. USS Block Island exemplified the evolution of escort carrier tactics. Operating with 4 destroyer escorts, Block Island pioneered night operations using radar-equipped Avengers. On the 29th of May 1944, Block Island's aircraft located U-549 on the surface at night. The subsequent coordinated attack demonstrated American precision. Aircraft maintained contact while vectoring destroyers to the submarine's position. When U-549 dived, sonobuoys tracked its underwater movement. The submarine fought desperately, managing to torpedo Block Island before being destroyed. The loss of Block Island, one of only 6 escort carriers lost during the war, illustrated American industrial supremacy rather than German success. Block Island was replaced by 2 escort carriers within weeks. Her aircraft and crew transferred to other carriers with barely a pause in operations. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz confronted this reality in a staff conference on the 2nd of June 1944. The transcript reveals complete understanding. The enemy's small carriers have eliminated our tactical advantages. We cannot operate on the surface by day due to aircraft. We cannot operate on the surface by night due to radar. The Americans have not defeated our submarines. They have made submarines obsolete. By August 1944, the United States Navy operated 77 escort carriers with 35 more under construction. These ships had moved beyond convoy protection to become offensive weapons. Operating off the European coast, escort carriers supported the Normandy invasion and hunted U-boats in the Bay of Biscay. German coastal U-boat bases previously immune to naval attack now faced carrier aircraft striking from beyond the range of land-based fighters. The technical evolution continued throughout 1944. The Commencement Bay class, larger and faster than the Casablancas, began entering service. These ships displaced 11,373 tons and could make 19 knots. Their flight decks stretched 550 feet. Each ship cost $11 million and required 8 months to build, still a fraction of fleet carrier cost and time. German naval intelligence struggled to comprehend the industrial capacity these ships represented. Commander Ernst Heckler, analyzing American production in September 1944, wrote that each escort carrier requires 30,000 tons of steel, 2,000 miles of electrical cable, 50 miles of piping, 80,000 blueprints, and 35,000 different components. Yet they produce them like automobiles. Seattle-Tacoma Shipbuilding alone has delivered 16 carriers in 18 months. Captain Daniel Gallery, commanding USS Guadalcanal, achieved the ultimate demonstration of escort carrier dominance on the 4th of June 1944. His hunter-killer group forced U-505 to the surface and captured it intact, the first enemy warship captured at sea by the United States Navy since 1815. The submarine's seizure demonstrated that U-boats were now prey rather than predators. The statistics of transformation were overwhelming. In 1942, before escort carriers became operational, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied ships totaling 6,266,000 tons. In 1944, with escort carriers dominating the Atlantic, U-boats sank 132 ships totaling 773,000 tons, while losing 249 submarines. German recognition of this transformation appeared in unexpected places. Lieutenant Commander Hans Rudolf Rosing, captured from U-846 in May 1944, told interrogators that we knew the war was lost when we counted your escort carriers. In 1943, we laughed at them. By 1944, we feared them more than battleships. An escort carrier could clear the entire ocean. Total escort carrier production reached 151 ships by war's end, 122 built in the United States and 29 in Britain using American designs. These ships operated approximately 4,000 aircraft, more than the entire German Air Force possessed in 1944. The pilots, trained in programs that produced 35,000 naval aviators annually, outnumbered total German U-boat crews by a factor of 3. Vice Admiral Lionel Wells, analyzing escort carrier effectiveness after the war, concluded that the escort carrier program represented the perfect convergence of industrial capacity, tactical innovation, and strategic necessity. We built merchant ships that could launch aircraft, trained civilians to fly them, and changed the fundamental nature of naval warfare. The human dimension was captured in the interrogation of Captain Lieutenant Wolfgang Luth, captured from U-575 in March 1944. Your escort carriers killed the U-boat force through presence. They were everywhere, always. We spent entire patrols submerged, seeing nothing. Men went mad from the stress. Those little carriers you built in weeks destroyed the elite of German naval power. Admiral Royal Ingersoll, Commander-in-Chief of the Atlantic Fleet, testified to Congress in March 1945 that the escort carrier program succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. We anticipated they would help protect convoys. Instead, they eliminated the submarine threat entirely. The Battle of the Atlantic was won not by destroyers or patrol aircraft, but by these converted merchant ships. The German Navy's final assessment came from Grand Admiral Dönitz in his farewell address to the U-boat force on the 4th of May 1945. You fought gallantly against overwhelming odds. The enemy's production of aircraft carriers made our struggle hopeless. They built carriers faster than we could build submarines, trained pilots faster than we could train crews, and covered the ocean with aircraft. Post-war analysis revealed the full scope. These ships flew over 460,000 combat sorties during the war. Their aircraft sank or participated in sinking 53 U-boats and 17 Japanese submarines. They provided air cover for every major amphibious operation after 1943. Only 6 American escort carriers were lost to enemy action. The Kaiser shipyards that produced most escort carriers became symbols of American manufacturing power. Workers who had never built ships before the war were launching carriers at rates that peacetime professionals considered impossible. Women comprised 27% of the workforce, African Americans another 15%. This diverse workforce produced carriers that swept German submarines from the seas. Captain Eric Brown, British test pilot who flew from numerous American escort carriers, provided perspective. The Germans mocked these ships because they didn't understand the revolution they represented. One escort carrier was vulnerable. 50 escort carriers were invincible. The Americans understood this. The Germans never did until too late. Commander Otto Kretschmer, Germany's most successful U-boat ace before his capture in 1941, watched the transformation from prisoner camps. Released after the war, he wrote that we failed to understand that Americans approached war as an industrial problem. While we focused on tactics and crew quality, they focused on production and coverage. The escort carriers were not better ships. They were the right ships in the right numbers. Rear Admiral Calvin Durgin, who commanded escort carrier task groups, summarized that we took merchant hulls, added flight decks, and changed naval history. The Germans laughed because they saw converted merchantmen. We saw mobile airfields that could be anywhere, any time. They counted ships. We counted coverage area. The final irony came from the Reich's leader himself, who in April 1945 reportedly asked Dönitz why the U-boats were failing. Dönitz explained about the escort carriers. The leader allegedly responded asking why Germany had not built such vessels. Dönitz replied that they could not build one per week. The leader had no response. By the 8th of May 1945, when Germany surrendered, the United States Navy operated 105 escort carriers with more under construction. These ships had made the Atlantic an Allied lake. The U-boat force that had nearly starved Britain was itself starved of operational space. Many late-war U-boats never fired a torpedo in anger, spending their entire careers hiding from carrier aircraft. Statistical analysis confirmed the transformation. In 1942, a U-boat had a 75% chance of returning from patrol. By early 1945, survival rate dropped to 25%. The primary cause was aircraft, predominantly from escort carriers. Of 40,000 German U-boat sailors, 30,000 died, a 75% casualty rate. Most died after escort carriers made submarine operations essentially suicidal. Commander George Chamberlain, who served aboard USS Guadalcanal, offered perspective. We weren't better sailors than the Germans. Their U-boat crews were incredibly brave and skilled, but we had endless carriers with endless aircraft. Every submarine they built, we countered with a carrier that could hunt it. It wasn't fair. It wasn't supposed to be. The escort carrier program cost approximately $1.5 billion in 1940s dollars. This investment destroyed U-boat forces while saving countless Allied merchant ships. Each escort carrier cost about $7 million and could protect convoys worth hundreds of millions, while destroying submarines worth millions more. Workers at Kaiser shipyards expressed pride in their achievement. Rosie Devlin, a welder who worked on 12 escort carriers, said that we knew those ships weren't pretty. They were basic and simple, but we also knew they worked. Every carrier we launched meant convoys would arrive safely. We were fighting the war with rivet guns and welding torches. The final accounting was stark. Germany began the war with 57 operational U-boats and built 1,162 more. They lost 785 U-boats, 632 to Allied action. Starting with 0 escort carriers in 1941, the United States built 151 by 1945. These ships operated approximately 4,500 aircraft at peak strength. They flew over 460,000 sorties and fundamentally changed naval warfare while maintaining an operational rate exceeding 80%. German U-boat commander Herbert Werner, one of few to survive the entire war, provided the summary. The escort carriers killed us through presence. We could avoid individual ships, but not systematic coverage. Every carrier they launched shrunk our operational area, until finally we had nowhere to go but down. The transformation from German contempt to despair occurred in less than 18 months. This rapid reversal demonstrated that industrial warfare operated on different timescales than traditional military planning. While Germany slowly improved submarine technology, America rapidly multiplied carrier production. The German response, found in captured war documents, was resignation. The American escort carrier program succeeded through brute industrial force. They built carriers faster than we could sink them, trained pilots faster than we could shoot them down. We were defeated not by better warriors, but by better factories. The escort carriers that German admirals laughed at in 1943 had by 1945 transformed the Atlantic from a U-boat hunting ground into an Allied lake. These converted merchant ships accomplished what the Royal Navy's destroyers could not achieve alone: the complete suppression of the submarine threat through overwhelming presence. The German admirals who laughed at escort carriers in 1943 lived, if they survived, to see these same vessels accepting U-boat surrenders in 1945. The transformation took less than 2 years. In that brief period, American industrial capacity rewrote naval warfare rules that had existed for centuries. The story ends where it began, with German naval officers examining American escort carriers. But instead of laughing at their crude construction, they stood silent, understanding finally that these simple ships had destroyed the U-boat force more completely than any enemy in history. American industrial might had transformed maritime warfare forever. The final testimony came from Grand Admiral Dönitz himself, speaking to his staff as Germany surrendered. "We lost the Battle of the Atlantic not to superior seamanship, but to superior arithmetic. The Americans built escort carriers faster than we could comprehend. We thought war was about warriors. They knew it was about production. We were wrong. They were right. That is why we lost.